Welcome to the Finding Hope group. We are Hope Sheds Light. Thank you all for coming. We are a nonprofit organization that brings the awareness to the disease of addiction, that brings knowledge, hope, and experience to the individuals and to the family members. Welcome to everybody on Facebook, and thank you all for watching and for coming. This meeting meets on the second and fourth Tuesday of every month, and on the first and third Tuesday we have our Finding Recovery group, and that group focuses on a topic, and all are welcome to come to that meeting as well. This group, we are focusing on an educational speaker, and afterwards we break up into small groups and we share on our experience, we share where we're at and where we can go. We also have coming up next weekend is our 6th annual Celebration of Hope Walk, located on Herring Beach in Seaside Heights. So if you can join us, that would be fantastic. We have many vendors, we have inspirational speakers and dignitaries attending, and that's at 8 a.m. If you haven't registered, you can pre-register online at hopeshedslight.org, and if you have not, you can also register. Tonight's topic is the 12 steps and education on the 12 steps, and I'd like to introduce Mark Schottinger, and he's from Brookdale Recovery. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. Nice to be back here. I see one of our founders just arrived. Hey, Arvo. My name is Mark. I'm an alcoholic and drug addict, and I'm going to speak on the 12 steps tonight. And I have 43 years of sobriety in AA and 17 years of Al-Anon that I joined because of my son 17, 18 years ago. So I'm a member of both programs, and I'm very happy about that. Now, speaking of Al-Anon, I thought before I give the 12 steps, I'd like to just give a little history, some of which I've kind of touched myself a little bit. But we're all here, and anybody that's in recovery, we're all here because of Lois Wilson. And the reason I say that is that it was Lois Wilson who kept pushing Bill Wilson out the door. And she was the first one who really discovered that you have to give it away to keep it. And that if Bill was going to give and it wasn't working, and kind of Lois put the finger in his chest, well, it may not be working for them, but it's working for you. So you get out the door and keep doing that. And that's actually a true story. And the way AA started, which happened, was Bill was on a trip in Ohio, and he was thinking about getting a drink, and he called up. He said, let me see if I can find a drunk. And they went. He called a number from the hotel he was in. And he ended up getting hooked up with Dr. Bob, the other co-founder of AA. And are you guys okay? Because I can see in all the signals. Are you okay with your camera?
Yeah, I'm just
okay.
making sure.
So they said, yeah, we've been waiting for somebody like you, because they had prayer groups going on in Akron about somebody to help Dr. Bob, because he was kind of a hopeless drunk. So they went over and decided they were going to have a meeting at the gatehouse of Henrietta Seiberling, who was from a wealthy family, and Bob was going to meet Bill at the gatehouse at Henrietta Seiberling's estate. So that was the first time that these two gentlemen met, and they were driven over by Bob's 16-year-old son, whose name was Smitty, and he's the one that drove him over. Now, this was around Mother's Day weekend in May, and yet the founding of Alcoholics Anonymous is in June. It's about June 11th. That's when they have Founders Day in Akron every year. So why did it not happen then? Well, because Dr. Bob, against the advice of people after he sobered up and met Bill, decided to go on a convention, you know, people, places, and things, right? So he decided he was going to go to this convention against the advice of people telling him not to go, and guess what happened at the convention? He got drunk. Where was the convention that he went to? Atlantic City, New Jersey. So at the recent Young People's Conference, I actually had a piece of the bar that he drank at. That was at the Young People's Conference. So that's why the June date is instead of the Mother's Day weekend. So that's how it started. And in case you don't think it's difficult being married to an alcoholic, Bill calls his wife and says, "Honey, I'm not going to be home for 3 or 4 months. Bob and I are going to be working on a rehab." So she's working, he has no job, and kind of lets her know that he'll be gone for 3 or 4 months, which I'm sure she had resentment. Like, what? So they actually started this little rehab in Dr. Bob's house, and they had drunks climbing down the drain pipes and, trying to help people. And Bill moved into little Smitty's room. So this was not a big house like doctors have big houses today. This is a kind of a middle-class neighborhood house you'd find in any middle-class neighborhood today. And I was in that house. I went to Founders Day, and I was kind of amazed at, like, here's this guy, Bill Wilson, this 6'2" drunken stockbroker, just moves in with Dr. Bob's son. And, and that's where AA really got started. He stayed there for 3 or 4 months. Now, we didn't have a book for a while because the book wasn't written until right before the war. That was part of the reason they wanted to write it, and there was some other reasons. So they were going off of the Oxford groups and some of the basic things that you find in many religions and many forms of spiritual nature. Now, one of the things that Bill had heard, one of the prominent psychiatrists in Europe very clearly said that the only people we have seen make it, like us in medicine, us in psychiatry, science, we have nothing we can do for these folks. We're miserable failures at trying to get anybody sober, but we have seen if people have a spiritual awakening or a spiritual experience, they can get sober. And that was very, very evident, in the early days. But they didn't have a book. They didn't have 12 steps. They did some things off the Oxford group. And, and that was the beginnings. Now, just for show and tell, right, I brought a couple of pieces of that history with me tonight because the first one I want to show you this is a book called As Lois Remembers. And actually, Lois Wilson signed this book to mark, gratefully, Lois 6/24/86. So it was in June of 1986, and I got a chance to spend about, I'd say 2.5 hours in her house. She was 90-some years old. She still had her good faculties, but she was very frail and they were just planning to make Stepping Stones, which is a national monument to AA, which was where Bill and Lois lived at that part of their life. It was an old hunting lodge in Westchester County that they converted into a house. And I'll never forget that. A gal that I worked with said, "Anytime you want to see Lois, let me know." I thought she was kidding. She said, "No, anytime you want to see Lois, let me know, and I'll take you over there." I'm going, "Are you kidding?" She goes, "No." I go, "Okay, I'll be coming back with a date tomorrow." So anyway, that's how I got to go over there. And there was a lot of memorabilia in the house, and it was in the plans of being a national monument. And not too long after that, Lois passed away. And she was, I believe, 91 or something like that at the time I met her. She was definitely 90-something. And later that year, I was to meet Smitty, Dr. Bob's son. We were having a grand opening of an addition to this treatment center I was running. And one of our guest speakers was, Smitty, Dr. Bob's son, Bob Smith. And so I got to spend about 2 or 3 days with him. And it it was very special. He was a very special man, very grateful. And I had him sign a book to Mark with my thanks. May the special bond we share in our programs, Bob Smith. So I feel very grateful that I got to meet a couple of these folks that are kind of the bedrock of Alcoholics Anonymous and Al-Anon. And of course, Al-Anon started not too long after AA, and the way that started is Lois outside of her house had a row of cars with all the wives picking up the drunken husbands, and they were just sitting alone, isolated out in the street. And she decided to bring them into the kitchen and talk to them, and you couldn't shut them up. They were all like, they had a great fellowship, and they were saying things like, yeah, no, I hit my husband in the head with a pot, and I got this one I hit with a frying pan. And they got this real camaraderie out of like the stuff they were dealing with in alcoholism. And that was really the start of Al-Anon, with Lois calling those people in from the street. So when the alcoholics would meet at the house, the Al-Anons would meet also. And Lois was very big with family programming and that type of thing. And so she's also, the founder of Al-Anon, which uses the same 12 steps. So that's kind of a little backdrop to Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, a couple of years ago, Alcoholics Anonymous was named the greatest social movement of the 20th century. I don't know if anybody has heard that or knows that, but it was, kind of coined or crowned the greatest social movement of the 20th century because it's almost in every country. And I'll never forget, I was at the International Convention in Seattle, Washington, when right after, because of Reagan and everything, the communist curtain fell. And it was the first time ever in the history of Alcoholics Anonymous or in the history of those countries that about 20-some countries marched into the big dome with the flags from their countries from the first time ever that they were able to have Alcoholics Anonymous meetings in those countries. It was a very, I still get chills when I think about it and say it. The ovation and the standing ovation and everything went on for like 10 minutes. And I think everybody realized, we complain, oh, I got to go to a meeting, or oh, I got to do this. And these folks, for the first time ever, were able to have Alcoholics Anonymous held in their country. And it was a very special moment. And it went on and on because it was the first time. And that was at the International Convention in Seattle in 1990, which I started going in '85. That's the last one Lois was at. And I made a promise that if I don't drink and don't die, I'm going to go every 5 years. So I've been every one since 1985, every 5 years, and I just love the whole thing about them and what's going on. So what happened with these 12 steps? So in a simple way, Bill said, I need to help create a spiritual kindergarten where people that have problems with alcoholism, drug addiction, can find a spiritual experience in the simple way possible. And the reason there's language like higher power and God is only mentioned a few times is that they knew that a lot of alcoholics had kind of had it with religion and, had a lot of different attitudes and things like that. So that's where you start to get the term, power greater than yourself, that type of thing. But it's also at the rock bottom of Alcoholics Anonymous is a spiritual experience to protect, the alcoholic from picking up a drink, and it's the same thing for Al-Anon. It's a spiritual program based on fellowship and based on people with experience sharing their experience, strength, and hope, helping each other. And that helps the person sharing it, and it also helps the person who's hearing it. And that was really going on before there was a formal 12 steps. Now, after the 12 steps were originally in the big book, later on they created what you call the 12 and 12, which is a more comprehensive view of the 12 steps. And I remember getting chills because when I was visiting Lois's house, where Lois and Bill lived, out in the back there was like a little separate, almost like a cottage, that was like a screened-in cottage. And that's where Bill wrote the 12 and 12. So he wrote the 12 and 12 out there in that cottage, which is just up in New York. It's up in Westchester County in New York. And that's where we got further clarification of the 12 steps, other than what's in the big book. There's absolutely nothing wrong. In fact, it's a good way to go to just go over the steps in the big book because it's short and sweet and right to the point. And it's not, you know, sometimes you can complicate a cup of coffee with too much verbiage, you know. But so that's, you know, and that was more in the 50s, I believe. I don't have the exact date on that, but so that was when the 12 and 12 came out. And of course, since then, these steps were adopted into Al-Anon, and then there's several other 12-step programs that rely on a fellowship and a spiritual experience. Besides just AA and Al-Anon, there's NA, there's CA. I'm not going to go through them all, but in other words, it works for all. And now we have AA in almost every country in the world. So it has spread to you know, all ends of the earth. And it did that through the traditions, which we're not going to talk about, but I don't think that the steps are unique. There's a lot of pieces of the steps that have been in religion for centuries, and that, you know, and there's a lot of things, you know, like confession, restitution, taking an inventory, a moral inventory. A lot of that stuff's been around a long time. What was very unique, and this came again after they got started, is the 12 traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's what really makes this a unique organization. And we're not going to go into all those tonight, but that's really worth knowing and understanding. And I know for me, I know today that it was the traditions that saved my life more than the book did. One of the traditions is the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. So even though I had been in and out of AA for 8 years, a little thick-headed, thought I was smart, and I was pretty dumb when you really think about it. But nobody could tell me I couldn't come back in. And since there were no assigned leaders, just trusted servants, I didn't have anybody like 86 of me at the door. And I was kind of shocked. I said, I can't believe these people are still nice to me and they still let me in here. Don't they know who I am? They shouldn't even be letting me in here, you know, that kind of thing. So the traditions, a short version is AA, the 12 steps keep us from killing ourselves, and the 12 traditions keep us from killing each other. I don't know if you've ever heard that, but that's part of what that is, and it's a worldwide phenomenon. And we, you know, refused any money and refused any organizers, so they did it by self-support, contributions, that type of thing, and it's now one of the greatest worldwide organizations recognized. So let's talk about the steps. I got to be careful here because I'm pretty long-winded, as you can see. So some short versions of the steps, okay, which sometimes, especially when you're a mocus alcoholic and you can barely concentrate on anything, sometimes it's the slogans and the short things that you can remember better than like this whole step or whatever. But the first 3 steps, people often say, I can't, he can, I think I'll let him. I can't, the first step, powerless over alcohol. He can, a power greater than herself can restore us to sanity. Number 3, I made a decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God as we understand him. I think I'll let him, okay? The 12 steps, trust God, clean house, steps 4 through 9, you know, do your inventory, make your amends, you know, trust God, first 3 steps, clean house, the next 6, and then the last 3, trust God, clean house, and then help others, the 12th step. So that's another short version of, you know, you got to give it away to keep it. And we actually survived on that long before we had anything else. That's what Lois knew. Lois kept pushing Bill out of the house, and that's why we're all still around, because she figured that out before Bill did or anybody else. And so I'm even more grateful to Lois than I was until somebody said that. So let's take the first step. I actually brought my glasses and I wanted to read it so I wouldn't mess it up. But we admitted we were powerless over alcohol and that our lives had become unmanageable. So there's really two things in there. And unfortunately, it takes a while for people to understand they're powerless over alcohol. And it's not the 8th drink or the 6th drink that gets you drunk, it's the first drink that gets you drunk. Kind of a revolutionary concept to an alcoholic. Like, if you don't pick up the first drink, you can't get drunk. Because we spend years trying to change drinks, formulas, food, content, activities and all that stuff. And all along, once that pilot light gets lit by the first drink of alcohol into the brain, you're off and running. I think the second part of this step is even more complicated, and this is why so many people never get sober. That our life is unmanageable, okay? So, in case you don't know, us alcoholics are pretty much know-it-alls. We kind of know a lot, even though we don't know much, we think we do. So we have that kind of arrogance about us, like, I know everything already. What's that hardware store sign? Don't confuse me with the facts, my mind is made up. You ever seen that one? So, so we're very difficult to admit unmanageability, and we don't need to do what the rest of you have to do. You get that one? Like, I'm unique. I can figure this out. I read the book. I'll be good. I'll be good next week. And then we're drunk like in 3 days. So none of that stuff works. Without a program, it doesn't really work. So a lot of people, both in treatment and in talking with their sponsors, have to really redefine unmanageability. Because unmanageability is not only, you wrecked your car, your wife left you, and you got fired. That's understandable unmanageability, but the unmanageability of the obsession and the compulsion to drink, 24/7 you're thinking about, when am I going to get my next drink? When am I going to get my next drug? And you're doing things so that you can try to control what's basically unmanageable, which is your emotions and your thinking and your mind. That's what's unmanageable, way before you pick up a drink. So that takes some doing for people to accept that and do that. And I put a person in treatment down in Texas last week, and so alcoholics think they're so slick. So she was gonna get picked up with a car. She's got more money than God, so money's not an issue, right? So we'll pick you up. No, she wants to take her car. Why do you think she wants to take her car? Because she wants a quick escape route. That's what she wants. And then she gets mad at the detox, so she takes me off the release, right? And I don't know her. I just helped a friend of mine get her into what seemed like a good place. So her sister's calling me. I said, well, she took everybody off the releases, so she's further managing her recovery, even though she doesn't get the first step yet, like you're unmanageable, right? So I gave her sister some ammo to talk to her when she calls, like, you're really manipulating the whole situation. And just because you didn't like something in the detox, the only professional in the whole group there, you fired right away. So that was real slick too. That's like putting your car down the street from the treatment center, right? It's the same type thing. So the unmanageability, you have to learn a little bit more about. And that's a little trickier. Now, so let's say you've taken the first step. Now you get to this God thing, this spiritual thing. Came to believe. And it doesn't say, I totally have 100% faith. It says, I came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. So they didn't put sanity in there because they thought we were already sane, right? I mean, that's not why that's in there. It would have said, well, we know you're already sane, just add God to it, right? No, it says, you need a power greater than yourself to restore your sanity. And a lot of people confuse the second step with being drunk. Like, people do crazy things when they're drunk, right? So I can get the little old lady from Pasadena, I can get her, half a jug of whiskey in her and she's going to act nuts like there's something wrong with her, right? Just because that's what it does. But they're not talking about when you're high. They're talking about the insanity of when you're sober. And they use things like walking out in front of traffic and stuff like that in the big book. So our sanity problem isn't just, when I'm loaded full of whiskey. My sanity problem is I should know better than picking up a drink again. I've just been out of jail twice, wrecked my car, lost my marriage, lost my job, and yet I'm still considering picking up another drink. So that's what they're talking about. They're talking about not being sane when you're sober, if that makes any sense. And a lot of people confuse that. So alcoholics make very insane decisions when they're sober, not just when they're drunk. And the restoration to sanity becomes very important. And that's where most people do not get this. They don't understand you trade a drinking problem for what? A thinking problem. Okay? So I was like, better living through chemistry for 15, 18 years. I thought I found the magic formula where I could manipulate how I felt and how I thought and how I interacted with the array of alcohol and chemicals I took. Now, I thought it was working for a while, but it didn't work. That's why I've been in jail. In fact, I shouldn't even be here. I hope this thing's on. I hope there's no more statute of limitations. But, I've been arrested 15, 16, all over the country, drunk. But I should have had sense that, why you keep doing this? That compulsion and that obsession. So, turning to a higher power, step 3. How do we solve this problem? Made a decision. Now, when an alcoholic makes a decision, it doesn't mean much, right? I mean, our word is like worth almost nothing. Okay? Until you get somebody that's sober a long time. I used to tell people when I ran Alina Lodge, I wouldn't trust them as far as I could throw them for a couple of years. A couple of years. Not like give them a parade when they get out just because they've been in rehab for a year. No parades this year or next year. How about waiting until they can walk, chew gum, and stay sober for a while? Then you maybe got something, okay? So we made a decision, which is very hard for somebody that doesn't have a lot of ability to keep a decision, to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood it. One of the most important words in this step is as we understood it. Because Bill and them already knew that alcoholics had a terrible relationship with God, and that was like something, because when I came in, I was like, you might exist, but a long time ago, I was like, you don't bother me, I won't bother you. How's that? That's how we'll do this. That was my relationship with God. Thank God, through AA and through 8 years of getting my ass kicked, I finally could surrender and really ask God to help me. But being stubborn and being stupid, it took a while. Okay, so as we understood Him is very important, because what that does is, instead of arguing about whether it's a Christian God or a Jewish God or a Muslim God, you don't have to argue about anything. You can create your own version of a higher power, as long as it's not you. That's the one caveat there. You can't be God. Makes sense, right? And if you think you are God, talk to somebody, because they might be able to help you understand that you're not. So that's what that understood Him really stands for. And what's our will and what's our life? Okay, so Alcoholics Anonymous is a new way of life. And our wills are very strong. So one of the things I had to learn is I didn't know God's will. I didn't even know my own will, other than I was stubborn. So I had to turn my will over to Alcoholics Anonymous and to my sponsor. And I felt safe that way. So one of the reasons I'm still alive is I finally realized the person who's the biggest danger to me is anything that comes out of here by myself. Okay, my thinking has gotten me years of trouble. So I have to have somebody that has sober thinking, called a sponsor, and I have to ask a lot of questions, and I have to call them a lot because I really don't know what to do and I've lost my way. So what saved my life was I figured out my will was killing me, and I didn't, so it scared me. Anything that I dreamed up, I didn't want to hear. Be like talking to yourself. No, I don't want to hear that. You know, you're an idiot. You've been doing this now for 8 years. I don't want to listen to you. You know, that kind of thing. That's how I was. I was just like, don't want to hear it. I'm calling this guy and see what he says. And that's what I did. So the turning the will over, even though you can do that even though you don't understand who God is. Okay? A lot of things you have to take as faith and trust and watch the people around you in the program because they're getting better. So my first sponsor talked about God like he was like talking about the Yankees or something. He didn't get into any big things. It was just like, it was like he was talking about the weather. And I was like, I don't know how he can do that, but I kind of like it because I don't feel like I'm preached at from the podium. It's certainly not the, I'm a fallen Catholic, by the way, so I'm doomed to hell anyway already, so. But it's, so I couldn't, you know, I couldn't understand that. And, but I understood that it helped him, and so part of what we do in Alcoholics Anonymous is we find somebody we like or somebody we think is doing a good job or has what we want, and you kind of follow them and you imitate them, just like a little kid would, and say, like, what's he doing? What does he think? And you listen at meetings and that type of thing. So that's there. Now, right after that, when people think they've turned their will over, a lot of people quit working the program and the steps right there because this kills them. Number 4 made a searching and fearless moral inventory, right? So I'm very good at taking your inventory. I don't want to take my own, right? That's what alcoholics do. That's our best defense mechanism. I'll take your inventory, attack you, and that way you won't attack my drinking, okay? Made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. Oh boy, okay. So, first of all, without God and without a third step, you make a very what? Superficial moral inventory. In fact, almost non-existent, because you don't have the strength, the honesty, and you're fearful. So I made a superficial and very fearful moral inventory. And it was short and sweet, and I kind of told myself I did it, didn't do anything really, and moved on. You know, the 5th step. So the big book has a great moral inventory, and it says, like, what's my part in this? You know, how did this threaten me or affect me? You know, and I'm not going to get that specific tonight. We don't, you know, you could spend a whole hour on each step. But, you know, there's very good, clear directions about how to take an inventory. And you take both your assets and your liabilities. And you have to usually do it with somebody else because there's a lot of things that we consciously leave out. I'll just put it that way. You know, we're trying to be honest, but like if you've been dishonest for the last 15 years, like instant honesty doesn't work very quickly, you know, because you're still telling yourself stories besides everybody else. And you know, some of us would lie just when the truth would be fine as well, but you know, you get used to that. So that's what we're doing. Without a higher power, okay, and without some advice and direction from a sponsor, it's very hard to do a searching and fearless moral inventory. That, by the way, is why the steps are in order. You know, a lot of people do 2 steps. I'm powerless over alcohol, and let me help you. That's called 2-stepping, not the Texas dance version. This is like the AA 2-step, right? Just skip all this work in the middle here, where we actually have to change, and just go to those 2 steps. All right, let's go to 5. Let's say you have enough God in you to do it without fear, and you have enough God in you to do a searching and really be comprehensive. And that's why they say get pencil and paper out and write it down. You know, alcoholics don't like writing anything down. I still don't. You know, but if you write it down, it can look you in the face and you can say, is that the truth or is that a lie? And you'll often find, that's why they say get pencil and paper and write it down. And that's when you go over it, if you take your fifth step with your sponsor, you have it written there, okay? Admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. The exact nature, I think, is important because for me, I did the same 10 things over and over again with different people in different states for years. So the exact nature of what I was doing was as important as what I did so that I could understand it, if you get what I'm saying. We repeat certain patterns of character defects and that type of thing. So we admit to God, to ourselves, we own it ourselves, and then to another human being. And I think a lot of people like to take it with a priest or a minister or something, but I think it's very good to take it with another alcoholic or another Al-Anon because it's just more human that way, you know. And a lot of times they have the same experience. Like one of the most healing things for me was when I did a fourth and fifth step with my sponsor in Texas after my first spot. I did a more comprehensive one. He would share some of the things. I came out of there going, Dick is just as bad as I am. What the hell? That was easy, I don't feel so alone. I don't feel like, this is so bad. So that becomes important, and then we get into, we're entirely ready to have God remove all these and before I skip over that, let me tell you what I mean by the exact nature, okay? I grew up in an alcoholic home. My grandfather was alcoholic. My father was alcoholic. I'm alcoholic. My son is alcoholic. And God bless my grandson, who's about 6 months old right now in my house. Who knows? But as alcoholics, we do not like authority figures. That's kind of a general statement. Some people might, but most of us don't. And so a lot of my problems were like resentment against authority, whatever it was, If they said left, I wanted to go right, just to show them I can go right. Don't tell me what to do, So the nature is kind of like a pattern. And sometimes you'll find you do the same pattern over 15 different incidents, but it's really the pattern that you need to break. And so instead of having to deal with 100 things, maybe you deal with 5 or 10 things. That's the importance of exact nature. Okay. We're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. And in the 12 and 12, it says this is what separates the men from the boys, the girls from the women, and so on and so forth. Why is that? Well, guess what? Why do we have character defects? We like them a lot. They do things for us. That's why. And so a friend of mine made it very clear one time. He says, God, I hate that stuff. He goes, I feel like I'm naked when I give up my character defects, like I have no clothes on, And I'm like, yeah, I understand that, Jerry, but you should still give them up because you're going to go to jail if you don't. So, but poor guy, he ended up dying. But it's entirely ready. That's a tough deal. That's a real spiritual deal. So we're usually as alcoholics, what we used to say up the lodge, quarter turning. We're kind of somewhat ready to let go some of them, but like entirely, I can't. That's too big of a task. That's too big of a mountain to climb. I don't even want to acknowledge what some of them are because I'm not going to give them up. So the sixth step is a very big deal, okay? Because this is where we start to get the character and the spiritual awakening to actually change who we are, okay? And the trouble with alcoholism, the trouble with addiction, and the trouble with everything we're doing is there is no permanent removal of any of this stuff. I can go out tonight and, I'm sure I used to drink a quart and a half of rum every night. I'm sure I could drink 2.5 quarts tonight, and I'm sure I could get locked up again too. Okay? So I only have a daily reprieve based on my spiritual condition. What a lot of people don't understand is based on your spiritual condition is also whether your character defects are operating or not, if that makes any sense. So if I have a good spiritual condition, I'm working an honest, good life, I'm trying to improve my relationships, I'm trying to do things, I have less likely that I need are going to operate in my character defects. Okay? But are they still there? Absolutely. We don't get permanent removal of picking up a drink or of our character defects. It's based on our spiritual condition a day at a time. That's why you keep hearing this stuff day at a time, day at a time. Try to live in day-tight compartments so you can keep it contained. And, but if you don't do an inventory and you don't list them and you don't have some willingness with God to give them up, how are you going to ever change? Okay. 7, humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. So again, we're going to God with this after we find out what they are. And that doesn't mean you can't do that every day. In fact, in the 10th and 11th and 12th steps, it's very comprehensive about going to God throughout the day if any of these character defects crop up or do anything. So we're giving you a daily way to do this in steps 10 and 11 and 12. Okay? But if you didn't do these steps, you wouldn't know what daily work you're working on because it wouldn't be there. Now, when we get into steps 8 and 9, and again, rather than just paraphrase it, I should read it. Made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. I can't tell you. I've rehabbed thousands of chronic alcoholics. Okay? And it's very spooky if you're in a room with twice as many people as this, and this is over 30-some years. Okay? And I ask, how many of you, and they've all been in AA and everything, how many of you did a complete 8th and 9th step? You might see a hand or two go up. It's very spooky. And they're not lying. They're honest enough to say, I never did the 8th and 9th step. And the few who did the whole program, had some sobriety, and then lost it. And they usually lost it over sickness, a medical problem, or some type of major death or relationship. That's how they lost their sobriety. Okay? But they're the ones that they had some good sobriety, they had done the 8th and 9th step. Okay? So, unfortunately, again, this is where a lot of people really fall down. They don't do an 8th and 9th step. And it's really crazy because the most profound impact that the 12 steps had on me that I know was my 8th and 9th step work. Second's not even close. So, and sometimes, and I don't want to get into therapy terms or anything, but the difference between guilt and shame. Okay, so like, I knocked over the Christmas tree and ruined everybody's Christmas. I feel guilty about that because of that act. But I feel terrible about myself because I ruined everybody's Christmas. That's where the shame is, right? So, alcoholics and drug addicts are loaded with shame. Because we all know at some level what we're doing. And we don't like ourselves, and we have a lot of shame about that. You can never reduce that shame, and you can never get free from that if you don't do the 8th and 9th step. And some of my most precious moments on this earth was doing 9th step work with my mother, my father, my brother, my family, and a couple of close friends. Precious. And most of them that I did that with are not around now. But thank God I did. And I got to tell you, I felt like $1 million after that. Felt like $1 million. It's like a whole chain was lifted off me. We walk around with a haunted house until you get the skeletons out of the closet, you own what you did, and you make amends to somebody else. And in my 8 years of going in and out of AA, which I love, I learned an expression down in Texas called Alkanon. Have you ever heard that one? An alkanaut is a Texas term, and that's somebody who orbits around the AA program and every once in a while makes a flaming reentry. Well, that was me, you know, several different states, flaming reentries. And part of that would be the I'm sorry tour. See, the amends is not an I'm sorry tour. In fact, you don't even do the amends for the other people, you do the amends for yourself. Okay, what the other person says is really none of your business. And even if they still don't like it, or even if they don't forgive you, or they don't want your money back, or whatever it is you're going to do, that's not the important thing. The important thing is for you to do it. And here's where I really give Bill a lot of credit, because when he talks about the 8th and 9th step in the 12 and 12, he basically says to you, this is how you do it. When you're firmly on the AA beam, and you've talked with your sponsor, because you can't do this at somebody else's expense. I can't go confess all kinds of crap and injure other people. That's not what you do, okay? So, when you're firmly on the AA beam, you not only go to these people with whatever you're going to make an amends for, but you tell them what you're doing now, which is being part of Alcoholics Anonymous, so that they have some understanding of what you're doing that might be different than what you were doing before, so that they might have some comfort that maybe you'll change. You don't guarantee anything. But I never understood that you include what you're doing in the program to try to change this so it doesn't happen to them again. That's a big thing. And that's a very humbling thing. Because the I'm sorry tour is a lot easier. Hey, I'm sorry for, punching you in the face. I really feel bad about that, and you walk on. Well, and when you do it the right way, I didn't even want people to know I was in Alcoholics Anonymous in those 8 years. Half the time they didn't know I was in or out, because I didn't tell them. So now, I got to say, I'm in Alcoholics Anonymous, I'm working on my sobriety, I'm trying to live a different life, I'm trying to have different values, I'm trying to live so that this won't happen again. And that's a testimony for me in front of them. It doesn't matter to them most of the time. And if people really love you or care about you, they'll be glad that you're doing something. And the people that still are going to have a resentment, they're going to have a resentment. That's up to them. The biggest problem with step 9 is not step 9, it's step 8. Nobody makes the list. And it's just a list. So sometimes you tell them, just make the list. I know you're scared to death of this. Just make the list. You don't have to do anything. You might never have to use the list, but make the list. So people never make the list, so they never have to make the amends. And a list is just a list. And then if you become willing, then you can do this. But it was really spooky for me, because once I started doing that, I started realizing, man, this is a very important thing. Because people are saying they're in recovery and they're trying to get out of this mess, but they're not following through with one of the important parts of the work. And these are the chronic relapsers that are in and out. So, yeah, you get 90 people, you get 200 people in a room, and you ask them, and they've all been in and out of AA for years and years, a lot of them, especially with a chronic relapse population. And you get, 1, 2, maybe 3 people out of that whole group hold up their hand. It's very spooky. And it's very spooky for them. I tell them, look around. Okay? So in case you didn't think this was important, this is real important. Because you're all sitting here. And the 3 who raised their hand, they had 10 years of sobriety, 6 years of sobriety. Most of you have not had that much sobriety before. Very, very important. And I just want to say again, except when to do so would injure them or others is very important. And that's something you talk to a sponsor and get some guidance about. And you don't go running out and doing this when you just got sober last week, because it's nonsense. When you're firmly on the AA beam, and sometimes it's very difficult for people, and it really gives them a lot of anxiety. I was so nervous about that, you have no idea. And I was sober, a couple of years when I did this. Okay, so needs to be done with care, but it needs to be done comprehensively. 10, 11, and 12. Continue to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. Sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. 12, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to others and to practice these principles in all our affairs. So the program of living, the program of recovery is in these steps 10, 11, and 12. And I think, and I often say this to my friends and colleagues in my Al-Anon group, that you ought to go to the big book and read the pages on steps 10 and 11 in the big book, because somehow it didn't make it to the Al-Anon book. But it's very clear about upon awakening, we ask God to direct our thinking. And if these following things crop up, we are to go to God to get rid of them. And if that doesn't work, we're to go to somebody else and talk to them about it, whatever. We are not allowed to go around carrying this stuff all day long. It's just not happening. That's how you retrain your mind. And it gives you some further inventory in step 11. And I learned through a lot of retreats that one form of prayer is nothing more than lifting the heart and mind to God whenever or wherever you want. So you can have a prayer right now, just lift your heart and mind to God, and that's a form of prayer. Okay, and I learned that from these recovering priests who all told me they didn't really understand spirituality until they got in AA, even though they had the robes and they didn't really understand it until they understood that spirituality. Now that's just what they say. I'm not putting anybody down. I'm just saying that spirituality is something that you feel, and it's a connection with other people. And the program, to this day, anything I can learn about or do, to try to improve my spirituality, I am open to and glad to do it. I feel that you can learn your whole life, and especially with spirituality is an expansion of your spiritual life and your prayer life. I don't want to embarrass anybody, but my sponsor is here. He just celebrated 55 years of recovery, and I've noticed in the last year or two, and he's gone through some tough things. He's lost his bride of many years, whatever. He's more spiritual than I've ever known. He's been my sponsor for over 20 years. Guy's like spiritual, unbelievable. And I just marvel at how it is. And that just shows me of something that I've been picking up on, which is, this spiritual growth thing has no cap to it. You're not capped anywhere. And, you give it away to keep it. You give it away to others. So in steps 10 and 11, that's where we take this way of life, and it's really the recap of the first 9 steps. If I've done anything, I only have to make amends now. It's something I did today or tomorrow or something. I don't have to go back and do it all. The house is unhaunted. I don't live in a haunted house. I don't have shame. So in steps 10 and 11, I can keep my house clean. I can stay in the day. I can walk with God all day and night. I can thank God. One of the things they say, to people brand new in recovery is just say something with please in the morning and thank you at night. That's all you got to do. Until something better comes along. Please help me be sober today. Thank you for keeping me sober. How long does that take? A couple of seconds, right? And when you get desperate enough, you'll do anything. So, I would call my sponsor and say, that's all I said. Is that okay? He said, yeah, that's all I asked you to do. Oh, great. Then I relaxed because I wasn't sure whether I did what he asked me to do. I have a very rich prayer life, a very rich life because of Alcoholics Anonymous. My son is in Alcoholics Anonymous. My wife and I are both in Al-Anon. And I've had a life beyond my wildest dreams. I can't begin to explain. So it works. It's been working for over 85 years. Not everybody works it, but it's 100% effective if you follow the directions. What's one of the first directions? Don't pick up a drink or drug anymore, right? So That's one of the first directions. So if you're picking something up, you're not following the directions. Okay? But, so, you know, that's what we have, and it still goes back to the very day that, you know, we still tell people, if you're having trouble, if you're struggling or whatever, go find a new drunk and try to help them, and you get out of yourself that way. And when you talk to a new person, you reinforce, you know, what goes on. And you reinforce in yourself what you believe in. So, I believe in no soul saved after an hour, so it's my hour's up. So thank you for listening very much.